July of 1944, a sunken farm lane south of Saint-Lô. If you are the rifleman third in line behind the lead Sherman, the first you know of the trouble is the tank in front of you brewing up. One shot did it. You never saw a muzzle flash because there was almost nothing to see. Somewhere in the wall of green ahead sits a low grey shape no taller than a standing man, dug in behind the earth bank, and it just cost you a 30-ton tank in a single round. That shape is a StuG, a German assault gun with no turret. For 2 months, it has set the price of every lane in this country. What you are carrying on your shoulder is the thing that will change that price. It is a length of steel tube, open at both ends. The men who named it thought it looked like a plumbing part. It is a bazooka. Before this is over, you are going to watch it turn the hunter in that hedge into the hunted. The tank that inflicted the most American casualties in the bocage almost certainly did not have a turret at all. The StuG could not spin its gun to chase here. And that one fact, the thing that made it so cheap and so deadly, is exactly the thing that got it eliminated in the Hedgerows. Everyone knows a tiger on sight. Almost nobody gives the assault gun a second look. The StuG III began life as a support weapon for the infantry. The Germans took the reliable hull of a Panzer III, threw away the turret, and bolted a gun straight into a low armored box on top. The whole point was to give the foot soldier a cannon that could roll forward with him and knock out a bunker or a strongpoint. Then the war on the Eastern Front turned into a fight for survival against Soviet armor. The Germans put a long 75mm gun into that box, and the humble assault gun became one of the deadliest tank killers of the entire war. The reason was the shape. With no turret, the StuG stood only about 7 feet and 1 inch tall at the roof. A grown man could look over it. Set that against a Sherman, which loomed a full 2 feet higher and carried a rounded turret that caught the light and told every gunner within a mile exactly where it was. The StuG had no such tell. Backed into a tree line, draped in cut branches, hull down behind a rise, it all but vanished. Crews learned to sit dead still and let the enemy drive to them. The first anyone knew of a StuG was usually the tank beside them coming apart. And it ran up a record that still looks unreal on paper. By the spring of 1944, the assault gun arm was credited with more than 20,000 enemy tanks destroyed. On the Eastern Front, the StuG batteries ran a kill ratio of roughly 3-to-1, 3 Soviet vehicles wrecked for every assault gun lost. One commander, a young officer named Bodo Sprans, was credited with more than 70 Soviet tanks knocked out by the autumn of 1943, most of them at close range, and he took 9 wounds doing it. The men who crewed these things were not amateurs. They were the most experienced tank killers Germany had, and they had turned ambush into a science. In Normandy, in the summer of 1944, the Germans could not build enough Tigers and Panthers to plug every hole, and they did not need to. The StuG was the answer to a factory problem. Germany turned out more than 10,000 of them across the war. In the same years, it managed only about 6,000 Panthers. For the cost and the labor of one Panther, the German army could put 2 or more assault guns in the field, and every one of them arrived already suited to exactly the kind of fighting Normandy forced on everybody. Brigades and batteries of them fed into the line behind the beaches. The Fallschirm Assault Gun Brigade, under a hauptmann named Gerstuer, moved into the ground south of Saint-Lô on the 6th of June and went straight under the control of the 3rd Parachute Division. Another formation, Assault Gun Brigade, 341, sat with 19 StuGs and 9 assault howitzers on the 1st of June, waiting for the Americans to come inland. The StuG reached far beyond the assault gun brigades. The Germans were so short of turreted tanks that they fed assault guns into every kind of unit. A parachute division got a company of them. Infantry anti-tank battalions that should have had towed guns received StuGs instead. Even some panzer divisions ran a company of assault guns in the slot where a company of proper tanks belonged. For the American infantrymen crawling toward the next hedgerow, this meant the low grey box could be waiting in almost any field, dug in by almost any kind of German unit. The threat was spread across the whole front, one lane at a time, waiting in almost any field he crossed. They came inland into the bocage, and the bocage was built for the StuG. Picture the ground. Norman farmers had spent 1,000 years marking their fields with hedgerows, and these were not garden hedges. Each one was an earth bank, 4 or 5 feet high, with a dense hedge grown on top, some of them 12 feet from the base to the crown, roots woven into a solid rampart. Every field was a walled box. The lanes between them ran sunken and narrow, roofed over with branches. A tank in one of those lanes could see to the next bend and no farther. And at that next bend, more often than not, the Germans had sighted an assault gun. It was backed into the hedge at the far end of a long straight run, its gun already laid down the length of the lane, waiting for a Sherman to nose into view. That was the arithmetic of Normandy for 8 weeks, and it was a brutal arithmetic. An American armored column had to move down these lanes. It had almost no choice. The fields on either side were sealed off by banks. A tank could not climb without rearing up and showing its thin belly. So the Shermans went down the lane, and the lead tank paid for the whole column. A StuG, a quarter-mile off, would put one long 75mm round through the front of the lead Sherman, and the American gunners, firing back, watched their shots do nothing, because they could not even find the low grey box to aim at. The crews took to a grim rule of thumb. Shoot for the tracks, they were told, and run. Nobody expected to win the duel outright. They expected to survive it. Armor alone was never going to break this. The Sherman was a fine tank in open country, quick and dependable. But its short 75mm gun was built to support infantry rather than to fight other tanks, and in a head-on trade down a lane, it was on the wrong end of the exchange. The American tank destroyer battalions had better guns, the 3-inch and later the 90mm, and they would come to matter enormously. In the bocage, though, they were bound by the same rule as everyone else. A gun that must be seen to be fired is a gun that can be seen first, and in the lanes, the StuG saw everything first. The answer could not be another vehicle nosing down the same sunken track. It had to come from somewhere. The assault gun was not looking. So where was the American answer? The tank destroyers with the 3-inch guns were coming, and they mattered, but they were tied to the same lanes and the same problem of being seen first. What the infantry needed was something a man could carry on his own 2 feet, something that could go where a vehicle could not, over the banks and through the fields and up to the flank of that hidden gun. And the strange truth is that the tool for it had been sitting in the American inventory since before the invasion, mistrusted and half forgotten, because on paper it looked far too weak to matter. That tool was the bazooka. Its story starts with a physicist. Robert Goddard, the American rocket pioneer, had built a tube-fired rocket for the army back in the First World War, and the idea had gone nowhere for want of a warhead worth firing. 2 decades later, a pair of army officers picked the thread back up. Leslie Skinner had the rocket. A young lieutenant named Edward Oule built the launcher, a plain metal pipe with a wire coat hanger bent into a sight. In May of 1942, at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, they carried their contraption to a test of anti-tank weapons and started scoring hits on a moving target while the fancier weapons on the range missed. The soldiers watching thought the long tube looked like a novelty horn. A radio comedian named Bob Burns used to play, a thing he called a bazooka. The name stuck for good. It had already been to war once by the time it reached Normandy, and it had come back with an uncertain name. The bazooka first saw combat in North Africa, handed to green crews who did not always trust it and did not always know how to use it. Some rockets failed to fire. Some flew wide. Some struck home and did nothing because the man behind the tube had aimed at the thickest plate on the target. The weapon picked up a reputation as a toy, a last resort you fired when there was nothing else to throw. North Africa had not yet taught the army the real point. The bazooka was built for the ambush and the close flank, and it was about to find the one battlefield that was made of nothing else. Understand what it fired, because this is where honesty matters and where most tellings go soft. The bazooka threw a 2.36-inch rocket, a shaped charge weighing about 3.5 pounds, and it worked by burning a jet of metal through armor rather than by smashing through with speed. The early rocket could punch about 3.5 inches of steel on a clean square hit. The improved round that came with the later launchers reached close to 4 inches. Those are real numbers, and against the front of a Panther or a Tiger, they were close to worthless. The front plate of a German heavy tank was thick and sloped, and men who fired at it head-on watched their rockets flash and skid off and do nothing at all. Soldiers cursed the weapon for it. One informal comparison put the hole a German Panzerfaust could blow at nearly 3 inches across against a bazooka hole of 1/2 inch. Frontally, against the heaviest armor, the bazooka was a coin toss at best, and every rifleman knew it. But the StuG carried far less armor than a Tiger. The front plate was not where this fight was going to be decided. The front of the StuG carried about 3 inches of steel. The sides carried a little over an inch. The rear was thinner still, and the roof was barely half an inch. A bazooka rocket that could bite 4 inches of plate did not need a lucky hit against the flank of an assault gun. It needed only to get there. And getting to the flank was a matter of terrain, which meant that for once the ground that had protected the German gun was about to hand it to the Americans instead. The Germans were not blind to the weakness. Well before Normandy, the Germans had begun bolting thin sheets of side armor onto their assault guns and tanks, plates the crews called Schürzen, hung a few inches out from the hull. But those skirts had been designed to defeat Soviet anti-tank rifles, the long heavy rounds that punched flat and fast into a flank. A shaped charge worked on a different principle. It did not rely on speed. Burned a narrow jet of metal through the plate, and a thin skirt fired at from a few yards away in a hedgerow was little more than a first layer to be chewed through. The countermeasure that helped against a rifle on the eastern steppe did not save the StuG from a rocket in a Norman orchard. This is the hinge of the whole story, so hold the picture of that turretless box in your mind. A tank with a turret can sit still and swing its gun through a full circle in seconds. It can watch one lane and put a round down another without moving a track. The StuG could do none of that. Its gun sat in a fixed mount that traversed only about 10 degrees to either side before it hit the wall of the hull. To aim at anything past that narrow slice, the driver had to start the engine and slew the entire 26-ton vehicle around. In the open, that was a small handicap. In a sunken lane hemmed in by earth banks, with the engine loud and the crew buttoned up and half blind, it was close to a death sentence. The StuG was built to face one direction and destroy everything that came at it. Come at it from the side, and it was a gun that could not turn to meet you. That is precisely what the American infantry learned to do. The method was patient, and it was deadly dangerous, and it was the exact opposite of the tank duel down the lane. A bazooka team was 2 men, a gunner and a loader. When a StuG was known to be sitting at the mouth of a lane, they did not go down the lane. They went sideways. They slipped through the gaps in the hedgerows and crawled along the base of the banks in the next field over. Working through the standing wheat and the orchards, they came up on the assault gun from the side or from behind, from the one arc its fixed gun could never cover in time. The whole American attack in the bocage came to be built around this movement, riflemen clearing one hedgerow so the team in the next could flank the gun in the field beyond. The Americans found a way to speed the whole thing up, and it came from a sergeant. Curtis Culin, a cavalry scout, took the steel from the German beach obstacles littering the invasion coast and welded a set of heavy prongs onto the nose of a Sherman. The prongs let the tank drive straight into an earth bank and tear a hole through it instead of climbing up and over and bearing its thin belly to a waiting gun. General Bradley saw a demonstration and ordered hundreds of tanks fitted with the cutters before the breakout at the end of July. It changed the shape of every fight. Armor and infantry no longer had to funnel down the one lane the StuG was covering. They could burst through the hedge into the flanking field on their own schedule, and that was exactly the field a bazooka team wanted to be in. Then it came down to 2 men and a tube, 20 or 30 yards from a machine that had destroyed dozens. The gunner had to stand or kneel with the launcher on his shoulder, hold his aim on the thin side plate, and touch it off, knowing the back blast would mark his position the instant he fired. A single burst of return fire could finish him before the loader had another rocket ready. The loader knelt behind. He tapped him ready and prayed the first rocket was the one. A shaped charge into the flank of a StuG did not skid. It bit through the inch of side armor and put its jet straight into the crew compartment, into the ammunition and the fuel. From that range, on that plate, the assault gun that had been untouchable from the front simply stopped being a problem. Live it for a moment from the American side of the hedge. It is a hot afternoon in the bocage, and the column behind you has already lost its lead tank to a gun nobody could find. You and your loader peel off to the left, over the bank, dropping into the next field where the wheat stands waist high. You cannot see the StuG anymore. You can only hear it, the flat crack of its 75mm as it fires again down the lane, and you steer toward the sound. You crawl the length of one hedgerow, cut through a gap on your bellies, and there it is across the last field, backed into the far hedge with its long gun laid down the lane, its whole attention pointed away from you. The flank plate faces you square. Your loader taps your helmet. You rise just enough to bring the tube up. You settle the wire sight on the middle of that grey side, and you fire. The rocket crosses the field in a heartbeat and goes in low behind the running gear. The assault gun that owned the lane is finished, and it never turned its gun so much as a foot in your direction. From inside that grey box, it played out as a nightmare, with no warning. To stay hidden, a StuG crew often sat with the engine off, buttoned up, eyes fixed down the lane where the enemy was supposed to come from. The commander watched his narrow slice of front through a vision block the size of a mail slot. Behind him and to his sides, he was close to blind. The first sign of the Bazooka team was the strike itself, a shaped charge burning through the flank into the fighting compartment. To answer it, the driver had to start a cold engine and haul 26 tons of steel around in a lane barely wider than the vehicle, while a second rocket was already on its way. There was almost never enough time. The very thing that had made the StuG a perfect ambush weapon, its fixed forward gun and its low blind hull, left it helpless the moment the fight came from the side. This happened over and over across Normandy, with names attached. At the Fière bridgehead near Sainteny, 2 paratrooper bazooka gunners named Peterson and Heim stood in the open and fired rocket after rocket at German armor pushing across the causeway. They knocked out one machine, then another. When their own launcher was damaged, they took rounds from it to feed a second tube and knocked out a third. On the 4th of July, near Sainteny, Sergeant William Nickel of the 83rd Infantry Division watched a German tank sitting barely 100 feet away, bristling with machine guns and a heavy cannon. A bazooka team was sent forward to deal with it up close. Up close was the only place the weapon worked, and up close was where the hedgerows let you get. A bazooka team from the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion knocked out a panzer in the same kind of point-blank hedgerow fight. These were not miracle shots. They were the product of a method, terrain, plus a shaped charge, plus 2 men willing to crawl into knife range of a gun that could finish them in an instant. The Germans felt the method as a steady bleed they could not stop. An assault gun brigade in Normandy did not lose its vehicles in one great pitched battle. It lost them 1 and 2 at a time in the lanes and the orchards to infantry it often never saw. And the wider trap was closing around them the whole while. As the American breakout gathered speed at the end of July, the German armor in the west was funneled toward the pocket at Falaise, and there the assault gun brigades that had ruled the bocage were caught and broken. The Fulchen Brigade that had moved south of Saint-Lô on the 6th of June was ground down in the Falaise pockets. The Luftwaffe assault gun battalion that had fought all summer in Normandy ceased to exist at Falaise and had to be rebuilt from nothing in Germany that autumn. The weapon that had made every lane a gauntlet did not survive the campaign it had been sent to win. For 8 weeks, the StuG III had set the terms. Its lack of a turret made it cheap enough to be everywhere and low enough to be nowhere, a gun that struck from ambush and could not be found. Every one of those advantages was real, and every one of them was answered by the same terrain that created them. The hedgerows that hid the assault gun also hid the 2 men crawling toward its flank. The narrow lanes that trapped the Shermans also trapped the StuG III, pinning a machine that had to turn its whole body to aim. And the thin side plate that the German designers had accepted as the price of a low, cheap, deadly gun was exactly the plate a 2.36-inch rocket was built to open. The debt from the start of this story comes due right here. Turret the StuG III did without was the very thing that would have saved it, and the Bazooka team in the wheat was the bill. None of this was cheap for the men who carried the tube. A Bazooka team fought from a range where a single burst of enemy fire, 1 round short, 1 alert loader on the German side, ended everything. They went forward anyway, field by field, hedge by hedge, and by the time the American army broke out of the bocage, the balance in those lanes had turned. The low grey box in the hedge was no longer the master of the ground. It had become the thing the infantry hunted. Cornered by its own fixed gun in terrain it could not turn around in, destroyed by a weapon its own crews had been taught to laugh at. The assault gun that ruled the roads of Normandy met a length of open pipe on a rifleman's shoulder, and the pipe won. So here is the question for you, and I want to hear it in the comments. Did you crew a tank destroyer or carry a bazooka yourself? Or did your father or your grandfather come home from the bocage with a story about the lanes? Tell me about it. And tell me which pairing you want next. There is a hidden German gun for every American answer, and I have a long list. Name the one you want to see, and I will bring you the record. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.